Welcome to the 2022 mid-season garden tour. It is the last week in July, which means that we are about halfway through our season and the garden is really ramping up. We are stepping into huge production time. I have got baskets of produce on the table every day that need my attention. It's one of my favorite times of the year. And I'm going to show you what we have growing. If you're new here, I am in Wisconsin, zone 4, which means that we have a pretty short growing season. We pack a lot of gardening into a small amount of time, preserve all we can, and then ride out the winter. This garden that I'm in now is our kitchen garden. We actually have 2 gardening spaces. This is what I call our kitchen garden because it's growing the stuff that I pick more often, or that I need to pick daily, or things that are a little bit more precious that if I didn't fence them, because this garden is fenced and our other garden space is not, if I didn't fence them, they would be devoured by chickens, rabbits, sometimes deer. And starting over on this side is zucchini way. This is the zucchini and summer squash. We like to grow them up poles. Zucchini like to sprawl and they take up a lot of room, especially as the season goes on. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And growing them up poles like this saves a lot of space. I also think it makes them easier to pick. So we've been doing that for a couple years now. And then past that are the brassicas. I have a few kohlrabi left. We've been eating those for a while now. And then lots of broccoli. I've harvested probably half of our broccoli at this point, and I'm watching and waiting carefully watching for the rest of it to be ready to harvest. I freeze a lot of broccoli every year. It's a really important preserve for us to have on hand. I love eating homegrown frozen broccoli all winter. It is just, of course, worlds better than store-bought. What isn't though, right? And then past the broccoli are the cabbages. Cabbages have also been trickling in. I've harvested a few. I've made some sauerkraut. That is one thing we make every year and rely on. We make lots of sauerkraut and store it in our extra fridge, and it lasts all winter long. In fact, we just finished our last jar from last year this week. We've had a pretty low pest year so far. We are starting to see more cabbage moths, so the cabbages are starting to get a little bit more damage, but so far it's been a really good year. We've just had so very few pests, which is such a treat, such a rare treat, because last year was just horrendous. We had more pests than I've ever seen before in my life. So this feels like a much needed break. Same story with the cucumbers. The cucumbers are looking better than ever because we've had hardly any cucumber beetles, but these are all cucumbers here. There are some pickling and some for slicing, fresh eating. Past the cucumbers is the garlic. We've harvested some of the garlic. The rest of it is so close to being ready. We'll be harvesting the rest of this probably in the next week or 2. And then if I swing over this way, at the end here, I have some kale and Swiss chard. A row of gladiolas. My grandma always had gladiolas in her garden, tons of them, so I always have to have at least 1 row of gladiolas. And then this is the bean patch. We grow a lot of beans every year. This is another one that I like to freeze a ton of. Love having homegrown green beans to eat in the winter. You'll notice some little fences in there. Those are to help some of the plants. I think it more depends on variety than anything. I like to flop over, so I use little fences to help prop them up and stay upright. And I think I said green beans, but I should say I have some purple ones and some yellow ones in here too. The purple and yellow I like more for fresh eating. We eat a lot of raw green beans during the summer as well, just for fun. And then past the beans is the melon patch. I underestimated how much room this melon patch was going to take up. I grew the same variety last year. It's called Farthest North. It was a fantastic melon for us, but because it was such a high pest year, the plants got really diseased and were kind of stunted early on. And now that they're bug-free and at their full potential, I just did not realize how humongous these were going to get. So I based the amount of room to give them on last year's growth, and I shouldn't have probably done that because they're trying to take over and invade everyone else's personal space, including the celery. Poor celery, I keep having to pull the melon vines back from it. It keeps sprawling through them, but celery is doing good. I harvest this as a cut and come again, so whenever I need celery, I just come out and pull off some of the outer stalks, and I'll do that all summer long. And then whatever is left in fall, I typically, like before it gets too cold, I will just pick it all and freeze it. Celery freezes really well. Over there is just some old spent plants that I'm saving seed from. I have a row of endive here that is holding on. It's a little bit of a trial for me. My lettuce bolted a long time ago, but this endive seems to be handling the heat of summer pretty well, which I am really encouraged by. And then over here in these bare spots is some new fall crops. This larger space here is all carrots. That's a little toad hole, which is fine. I love toads in the garden. There's little baby carrots all over there. You probably can't see them. They're tiny. And then a half row of peas. That'll be for fall harvesting. And past that is the onion patch, part of the onions anyways. They're doing okay this year. We've had a really weird spring weather-wise. It was a really cold spring, and now it's been a really hot summer. It's been a very dry summer, and I don't think the onions are taking that very well. So some of them are flopping prematurely, which is okay. We'll still get plenty of onions out of this patch to have for the winter. And then look at this dill. It is literally taller than I am at this point. I've never grown, there's actually two varieties here. One is called Hera and one is called Dill Delight. I've never grown dill this big. They are just phenomenal. They're more of a ferny dill, so they produced a ton of ferns before they produced flower and seed head, which is really great. I have enjoyed these varieties a lot. They have outproduced any other dill that I've ever grown. And this is our crop garden. This is the garden where we grow more of the bulk stuff that we grow just a lot of. Over on this end of the garden is the sunflower patch, and with the exception of the couple that you see blooming there, which are just pretty and for cutting, all of these sunflowers are for production. They're going to be for seed. And I'm hoping if the wild birds leave me any, we'll be able to feed these to our chickens this winter. And I want to use some for sprouting sunflower sprouts to have for fresh eating in the winter. Over this way is the corn. All of the corn that you see in this garden is popcorn. I grow a lot of popcorn every year, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things to grow. I grow really beautiful multicolored popcorn. And I like to plant like this. Let me back up here. I have two patches of popcorn that are kind of flanking this aisle of winter squash. And planting them like this has worked really well for me because winter squash tend to take up a lot of room. They need so much room to grow their big vines. The majority of at least the first part of their leaves start down this aisle, but then as the vines grow, they kind of ramble through each side of the corn. And then that's not wasted space because corn and squash are really good friends and they grow really well together. I will say the squash are looking really good so far this year. Fingers crossed, knocking on wood there. We've had a really low pest year this year. I have not even seen, I don't want to say this out loud, I have not seen a squash bug yet. I'm sure they're on their way. But that has made the squash look just amazing. I love growing squash. I grow probably a dozen varieties every year. There are a lot of squash plants in here. They're one of our most important storage crops. And then just past the corn is the tomato patch. This is the bulk of our tomatoes anyways. This is where I plant the bigger tomatoes. So this has all of my paste tomatoes and slicing tomatoes, things like that. The cherry tomatoes, the small tomatoes, are planted in a different space closer to our house because they need a more frequent picking. But these are all the big ones. And then next to those is a row and a half of peppers. I have all sorts of different peppers in here, hot peppers, bell peppers, sweet peppers, eating peppers. And they're just starting to ripen. We've been harvesting peppers for a week or two, a little trickle of peppers. On this end of the garden is the potatoes. We grow a lot of potatoes every year. Our goal is to grow hundreds of pounds of potatoes. This year, the potatoes are not doing great. I don't know what it's been about this year, but they look more diseased than they ever have. So I'm hoping we still get a good crop. I know there are some potatoes under there. I just hope these plants can hold out a little bit longer so that the potatoes can get even bigger before we harvest them. In addition to the two big, large in-ground gardens, we have a few raised beds and a few other gardening spots around the house. This is a bed I usually plant carrots in. I really love to plant carrots in a raised bed. So much easier to grow them. And then I have two herb beds here that are right out my front door so I can run out every single day and gather fresh herbs for dinner. And you know, when I planted this dill in here, I did not realize how incredibly humongous it was going to get. So it's kind of taking over everything. But here's what I have planted in the herb beds. Some lavender, lots of thyme, lots of basil, regular green and purple basil too. Some sage, lots of parsley, and some rosemary. And I don't have oregano growing in my herb bed because it is growing, it grows wild all over our entire yard. This is, I think, was planted by the previous owners. All that purple is oregano. All of these green patches you see in the lawn are all oregano, so there's no shortage of that here. And then we have one more growing space on the side of our house. This little in-ground plot, I plant something different in every year. This year it is sweet corn, and I planted this over here to plant it as far away from my popcorn as possible. The fence is going to be taken down soon. That was really just to keep the chickens out of the newly planted seed, and now that those corn plants are pretty big, I'm going to take that down so it looks a little prettier back here. And then over under the awnings of our porch are the cherry tomatoes. I like having these right outside the door so I can just come and pick them because they do typically need picking just about every day. One rogue squash that I let grow. And then over this way, some beautiful morning glories and a couple other raised beds. This one has onions in it this year. And then another gigantic bed of carrots. And so there you have it. Those are our vegetable growing spaces this year. If you enjoyed this video or you found it helpful, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you are the first to know whenever a new video is posted.